Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. All right, the first thing, another reminder that it is our fundraiser at antiwar.com. Antiwar.com is entirely reader funded, which means we have to do fundraisers occasionally. And this time around, we're trying to raise $100,000. And your money is spent very efficiently. It goes toward running the website, paying our small staff and contributors. So if you have the means and you appreciate our work, please go to antiwar.com/donate and help us out. You can see the different ways you can support us: crypto. You could use PayPal, you can make a phone call, you could use a credit card. Lots of different ways you can help us out. Antiwar.com/donate. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: the U.S. resumes military aid and intel sharing for Ukraine. So the Trump administration has lifted its pause on military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine following talks between U.S. and Ukrainian officials in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. U.S. officials said the move came after Ukraine signaled it was open to a 30-day ceasefire if Russia agreed. The U.S. and Ukraine said in a joint statement, quote, Ukraine expressed readiness to accept the U.S. proposal to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire, which can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties and which is subject to acceptance and concurrent implementation by the Russian Federation. The United States will communicate to Russia that Russian reciprocity is the key to achieving peace. The United States will immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine, end quote. The joint statement also said that both countries' presidents agreed to conclude as soon as possible the minerals deal. That it was basically kind of vague, the wording on the deal, saying that they agreed to sign it as soon as possible, but not clear exactly when the minerals deal is going to be signed. And President Trump said on Tuesday that U.S. and Russian officials could meet in the coming days, and that was affirmed by Russia's foreign ministry. They said talks between U.S. and Russian officials could happen within the next few days. And Trump also said that he planned on speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin soon. So far, there's been no public reaction from Moscow about the idea of a ceasefire. I'm recording this late Tuesday night here on the East Coast of the U.S., and so far I have not seen Russia say one way or another how they feel about this idea of a 30-day ceasefire. Putin and other Russian officials have previously rejected the idea of a temporary ceasefire. Putin said in January, quote, that he would not accept some kind of respite for regrouping forces and rearmament with the aim of subsequently continuing the conflict, and that he wanted a long-term peace based on respect for the legitimate interests of all people, all nations living in this region, end quote. And Moscow also has the momentum on the battlefield on its side as its forces continue to make gains in eastern Ukraine and are pushing Ukrainian troops out of Russia's Kursk Oblast. So with Russia's momentum on its side, it might view this as an attempt for Ukraine to stabilize the front lines, get more U.S. military aid since the weapon shipments have been resumed. Again, we still haven't seen a public reaction. I think there's a chance if the U.S. really shows Russia that it wants a permanent deal out of this, that it wants a permanent ceasefire, that Ukraine is willing to make concessions, or that the U.S. is willing to pressure Ukraine to make concessions, then maybe there's a chance Russia will accept this. But then there's also the chance here that Russia won't accept it. They won't find it acceptable. And then the U.S. will say, okay, well, we're just going to keep this proxy war going. And then that's that. Judging by what Marco Rubio said here, that seems to be what he's hinting at. So Rubio said he was involved in the talks, him and Mike Waltz. Rubio said, quote, we're going to tell them this is what's on the table. Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and start talking. And now it'll be up to them to say yes or no. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here, end quote. So Zelensky has also repeatedly rejected the idea of a ceasefire, and his openness to the 30-day truce marks a significant shift in his position. U.S. officials have said that the pause in U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing would only be lifted after Ukraine made clear it was willing to work toward peace. Mike Waltz, Trump's national security advisor, said that the Ukrainian delegation made it clear that they shared Trump's vision for peace and said that they got into details about how the war is going to permanently end. So, I mean, again, if they're really talking to Russia about permanently ending this thing with a deal that doesn't violate, Russia's red lines, then maybe there's a chance of a ceasefire here. I hope a ceasefire is reached. I hope the killing stops. But Waltz also said that they discussed the idea of long-term security guarantees, and I mean that's going to be the major sticking point here, because you see Ukraine and it's the European countries, really the UK and France, a few others, all saying that they want to send a bunch of troops to Ukraine to enforce a ceasefire. Of course, they'll want to keep the military aid flowing, and those things are just not going to be acceptable to Russia. Russia has rejected that multiple times. So, I think that really is the major sticking point here, is what are the security guarantees going to look like? There's a report saying that the U.S. is telling Ukraine that they're going to have to cede the territory to Russia. So we'll see what happens in the coming days if we get a clearer picture of Russia's position on Wednesday. So far, we haven't seen them it's not like they're just rejecting it, outright. So I'm sure that they're going to engage in some diplomacy with the U.S. in the coming days. And so another thing, the backdrop here is that on the day these talks were held, Ukraine launched a massive drone attack on Russia, which is being reported as like the biggest Ukrainian attack on Russian territory of the war. So we'll get into some stuff about that. This one is about the situation more on the battlefield. Russia claims rapid advance in Kursk. This one's from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So Moscow is reporting that the Russian military drove Ukrainian forces out of 12 villages in the Kursk Oblast. This is inside Russia. Last year, Russia seized a large swath of the sparsely defended Russian territory. In a statement released on Tuesday, the Russian Defense Ministry said, quote, the units of the North group of troops during the offensive liberated 12 settlements and more than 100 square kilometers of the Kursk region territory, end quote. Russia also reported gains in Ukraine, saying that they took over another village in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. And so there was, Kyle gets into the drone attacks. Monday night into Tuesday, Ukrainian forces launched their largest drone assault on Russia since the start of the war. Over 300 drones targeted a number of targets in the Kursk and Moscow regions of Russia. One was the Druzhba oil pipeline that brought oil from Russia to Hungary. And we'll get into that in the next story here. But this is, we've seen a lot of statements, obviously, from Russia condemning this. There was kind of a blistering one from the Russian Foreign Ministry, saying that they did it purposely to coincide with the talks with the U.S. And I believe 3 people were killed inside Russia. All right, so the next one here, Budapest blasts Kiev over attack on pipeline bringing oil to Hungary. So this is another one from Kyle. So Hungary has voiced its opposition to Ukrainian attacks on Russian pipelines that bring oil to Hungary. A Ukrainian attack on a pipeline briefly paused oil deliveries to Hungary. And so the response from Hungary's foreign minister, he said that he called for Kiev to halt attacks on energy infrastructure that brings oil into Hungary. And this is where it imports most of its oil. And the pipeline was operational by Tuesday afternoon, so it was only briefly paused. So Hungary's foreign minister said, quote, we consider the attacks directed against the energy structure of Hungary unacceptable. We call on the Ukrainians not to attack the energy infrastructure heading toward Hungary. Hungary cannot be blamed for the war between Russia and Ukraine. Hungary is not responsible for this war, end quote. While Kiev and Budapest came to an agreement last year that allowed oil to continue to flow through Ukraine sections of the Druzhba pipeline, Ukrainian sanctions minister Vladislav Vlasic accused Hungary of using the pipeline problem as an argument to block the continuation of sanctions. So when it comes to the European, ban on Russian oil. Hungary and I believe Slovakia and the landlocked nations that rely on pipelines to get their oil got exemptions from those EU sanctions. All right, but more Ukrainian attacks on energy infrastructure here. All right, the next one here, getting into some Gaza stuff. Israeli airstrike in Gaza kills 4 Palestinians. So an Israeli airstrike in Gaza near the Netzarim corridor killed 4 Palestinians, Reuters reported on Tuesday, citing Gaza's civil defense agency. The report said relatives and medical staff at the Al-Ali Arab Baptist Hospital said the 4 men who were killed were civilians. Arafat Al-Hana, the father of one of the victims, said, quote, "Did we end the war or what happened? We don't know," end quote. And this is from the hospital, people mourning the dead. For its part, the Israeli military claimed that its air forces targeted, quote, "terrorists who were engaged in a suspicious activity on the ground in central Gaza and posed threat to the force," end quote. But Israel offered no evidence for this claim. The Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that a Palestinian woman was killed by Israeli drone fire near the southern city of Rafah. Palestinian officials told the AP that a total of 8 people were killed by Israeli attacks in Gaza over the previous 24-hour period. So since the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal went into effect on January 19th, Israeli forces have killed more than 100 Palestinians in Gaza. And Israel has also violated the ceasefire by refusing to engage in negotiations on the second phase, and it imposed a total blockade on aid and all other goods entering Gaza at the end of the first phase. And on Sunday, Israel cut electricity to Gaza, ramping up the collective punishment of the civilian population. Israel is still trying to get Hamas to agree to release the hostages without a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza or commitment to a permanent ceasefire. Hamas has maintained its commitment to the initial deal reached in January and has said the only way it will free hostages is if the second phase is implemented. Negotiations are expected to continue in Qatar on Tuesday that will involve Steve Witkoff, who's Trump's envoy to the Middle East. So those were expected to go on Tuesday. I thought Witkoff was initially, it was reported he was going to be involved in the talks in Saudi Arabia with the Ukrainians, but I didn't see him in any of the pictures there, so I guess he just went to Qatar. All right, so the next one here, Khalil being deported for speech contrary to U.S. foreign policy. So the Trump administration is trying to deport 30-year-old Mahmoud Khalil, a green card holder who was arrested by ICE agents over the weekend for activity that is contrary to U.S. foreign policy based on his involvement in protests critical of Israel's war on Gaza at Columbia University. So a White House official told the Free Press, which is Barry Weiss's media outlet, that Khalil's activity was a, quote, "threat to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States." The allegation here is not that he was breaking the law. He was mobilizing support for Hamas and spreading anti-Semitism in a way that is contrary to the foreign policy of the U.S., end quote. And, of course, they accuse him of spreading anti-Semitism. But, if you look at these protests, as I always mention, their Jewish students have been involved in the organizing, Jewish organizations. But anyway, the official said that the allegation is not that he was breaking the law, not that he committed any violence, but that he is involved in these activities, mobilizing support for Hamas, which it just means mobilizing against Israel, what Israel's doing in Gaza. And the White House official said that the basis for targeting Khalil is being used as a blueprint to target other foreign students, either on visas or green cards, and more arrests at other schools are expected. So at a White House press conference on Tuesday, Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt claimed that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has the right to revoke the visa or green card of individuals who are, quote, adversarial to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States, end quote. And she cited the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. She said, quote, "Mahmoud Khalil was an individual who was given the privilege of coming to this country to study at one of our nation's finest universities and colleges, and he took advantage of that opportunity, of that privilege, by siding with terrorists," end quote. It really sounds like it's 2002 again. It's right after 9/11. You're either with us or against us. Is all this rhetoric that I'm hearing not just from the administration, but also from a lot of Trump supporters who are all favor this whole deportation thing, these deportations on behalf of Israel. Leave It also claimed that Khalil was involved in distributing pro-Hamas propaganda flyers, but she did not offer evidence to back up that assertion. She said that she had the flyers on her desk, but she didn't want to bring them out. But this is a claim that I've seen all over Twitter from people who want him deported. They put pictures of these flyers that says something like it's from Hamas's media office. And the allegation, I don't even know if the allegation is that he handed them out directly or that he was involved in protests where they were handed out. But there's just been no evidence of him actually handing them out. And there's been no evidence that he's a supporter of Hamas. There's a lot of videos of him talking because he served as a spokesman for the student group. And nothing indicates that he supports Hamas. And, of course, that's the accusation, again, for opposing what Israel has been doing and opposing U.S. military aid to Israel. And these protests were specifically about trying to get Colombia to divest from Israel. And the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, they responded to Leave It's comments and said that the law she appeared to be citing, quote, requires the Secretary of State to have reasonable grounds to believe the person's presence or activities in the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. End quote. FIRE noted that in explaining how Khalil met the standard for deportation under the law, the administration, quote, did not allege Khalil committed a crime, but did explicitly cite the content of his speech, end quote. FIRE said that, quote, protesting policy is protected by the First Amendment, as is rhetorical support for a terrorist group, end quote. Khalil was born in Syria, has Algerian citizenship, and is of Palestinian descent. As I mentioned yesterday, he's married to an American citizen who is 8 months pregnant. He's been taken away from his wife and is at an ICE facility in Louisiana. For now, his deportation is being blocked by a judge who I think it looks like there's going to be a hearing on Wednesday. The judge has the ability to free him, as far as I understand it, and his lawyers and wife are asking for him to be released and go back to New York while he fights this thing so he could be with his wife who's about to have a baby. Forget even about the legal argument. I mean, this is the fact that they're trying to say Marco Rubio has the ability to deport anyone who he claims is doing anything or saying anything that's contrary to the foreign policy of the United States. That is a very scary thing to think of. And, forget about the legal, if they have the legal right to do this or not for a second. I mean, however, if they do figure out a way to do this, this is clearly being done on behalf of Israel. This is clearly political persecution by the federal government, whatever the legal manner in which they do it. It's obvious because he came to the U.S. and he was involved in protests against Israel. That is why this is happening. All right, so the next one here, Israeli minister says that God sent Trump to build settlements in Gaza. So Idit Silman, the Israeli minister of environmental protection, said on Tuesday that God had sent the Trump administration to advance the goal of ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the building of Jewish settlements. According to Haaretz, Silman, a member of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party, said that the government is committed to the idea of encouraging emigration. They always make it sound so nice. We're just going to encourage emigration. And added that she believes, quote, God has sent us the U.S. administration, and it is clearly telling us it's time to inherit the land, end quote. Silman vowed that Gush Katif, a Jewish settlement in Gaza that was evacuated in 2005, would return. She said, quote, it could be in single-family homes or Trump-style towers, but we will definitely go back there. I see no other solution to terrorism. The answer to terrorism is sovereignty, end quote. She added that the only solution for Gaza is to empty it of Gazans, an option that she said is realistic. So other extremist members of the Netanyahu government have welcomed President Trump's calls for Palestinians in Gaza to be removed permanently and for the U.S. to take over the Palestinian territory, including Smotrich, the finance minister. He says the plan is in the works. It's taking shape. He says they're going to establish this new migration administration to actually start expelling Palestinians from Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes against Lebanon kill at least 2. This one is from Jason Ditz. So Israel continues to carry out attacks against southern Lebanon despite there being an active ceasefire in place since November 26th. They included a drone strike against a vehicle in the Nabatea governorate in the area around Deir al-Zarani, another just further north, and another strike against what Israel is calling a Hezbollah facility elsewhere along the border. At least 2 people were reported to have been killed. Israel says that the Deir al-Zarani strike killed a man named Hassan Abbas Izzeddin, who they called a significant Hezbollah air unit figure. So the other drone strike targeted a vehicle just north of the first strike and came about 15 minutes later. Reportedly, another person was killed in the strike, though they have not been identified by either the Lebanese health ministry or the Israelis. So now there's an announcement that Israel and Lebanon have begun new negotiations on the disputes over exactly where the land border between the two nations is. The U.S. reportedly pushed hard for such negotiations to begin. The de facto border right now is the blue line drawn by the UN in 2000, though several locations along the blue line are disputed. The most significant disagreement is Sheba Farms, presently under Israeli occupation. I believe both Lebanon and Syria claim Sheba Farms, but it's under the occupation of the Israelis. All right, so the next one here, Israeli troops kill 5 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. So on Tuesday, the Palestinian Authority said that Israeli troops killed at least 5 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank over the previous 24-hour period, as the Israeli military continued raids in the territory as part of an operation that was launched in January. The Palestinian Authority said that 5 Palestinians, including a 60-year-old woman, were killed by Israeli forces in the northern city of Jenin, which has been a focus of the Israeli offensive dubbed Iron Wall. The PA said that its own forces killed a Palestinian man who was previously wanted. The PA claimed that the man had previously opened fire at Palestinian security forces, and before Israel launched Iron Wall, the PA had been conducting its own operations against resistance groups in Jenin. The PA said that the 60-year-old woman who was killed was shot by IDF troops at a checkpoint. As I covered recently, Haaretz reported that the Israeli military has expanded its open fire orders in the West Bank, which has led to an uptick in the killing of civilians, including children. The Israeli military said that it killed 2 Palestinians during a gun battle at a house in Jenin, and the IDF was also active in the southern city of Hebron, where its forces wounded a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old with gunfire. Also on Tuesday, Israeli settlers terrorized civilians in a village near the central city of Ramallah. The settlers attacked cars and burned 3 vehicles. And settlers have just been completely emboldened by the Israeli military's actions, just, obviously for a while now. But since Israel launched this new operation, it seems like they've been emboldened even more. And a settler leader recently said that Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, told him that Israel must behave exactly like Gaza in the West Bank. And we've seen in Jenin and Ner Shams in the refugee camps, they've forced all the Palestinians out. Tens of thousands have been displaced, and they're destroying civilian infrastructure, very similar to what's happening in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israel bombs South Syria, vows indefinite occupation. So this article is from The Cradle. So, how many Israel bombs a place stories are we going to have here? Israeli warplanes conducted over a dozen airstrikes on Syria's southern Daraa governorate on March 11th, the latest string of strikes targeting the ousted Assad government's military infrastructure since extremist militants took over the country. 2 Syrian security sources told Reuters that at least 6 strikes hit a base in the town of Jabab, while at least another 8 hit a former army base in the city of Isra. There were no immediate reports of casualties. The Israeli military claimed that it hit targets whose presence posed a threat to the state of Israel. And so the Israel Katz, he visited a new military outpost on Mount Hermon on the Syrian side of the mountain. And he issued a new threat to Jelani, or who goes by his real name now, Ahmad al-Shara, the de facto leader of Syria, the leader of HTS, the founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria. He said, quote, "Every morning when Jelani opens his eyes at the presidential palace in Damascus, he will see the IDF watching him from the peak of Hermon. And remember that we are here and in the entire security area of southern Syria to protect the Golan and Galilee residents against any of his threats and those of his jihadist friends. The IDF is prepared to stay in Syria for an unlimited amount of time. We will hold the security area in Hermon and make sure that all the security zones in southern Syria are demilitarized and clear of weapons and threats," end quote. So again, as I said, they're using what, should rightly be condemned, these horrific massacres by HTS in northwest Syria to, take more Syrian territory and justify the indefinite occupation. One thing I want to mention, the Gray Zone reprinted Jason's report about Syria, and they put a note at the front that the Gray Zone sources in Syria told them that they believe that the real death toll in the massacres of the Alawite civilians was over 4,000. Just absolutely horrific. All right, so the next one here, and of course, you always have to point out that Israel helped put these people in power, and is now using it as an excuse again to invade Syria. All right, so the next one here, the Houthis renew blockade on Israeli ships over Gaza aid. So Yemen's Houthis announced on Tuesday night that it has reimposed its blockade on Israeli shipping in response to Israel blocking the entry of aid and all other goods into Gaza. Houthi military spokesman Yahya Saree said that any Israeli ship that enters the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab Strait, the Arabian Sea, and the Gulf of Aden will be targeted. He said the ban on Israeli ships entering those waters will continue until, quote, "the crossings to the Gaza Strip are reopened and aid, food, and medicine are allowed in," end quote. So this announcement came after Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader, issued an ultimatum to Israel on Friday, giving them a 4-day deadline. The 4 days is up. So we'll see. We might start seeing attacks on Israeli-linked shipping in the region again. And then I think there's a big risk of the U.S. restarting its bombing campaign on Yemen that did absolutely nothing to stop the Houthis. What stopped them was the ceasefire in Gaza. Well, Israel has violated that, so now they're going to restart these attacks, and the region could explode again. All right, so the next one here, Iran's president to Trump, do whatever the hell you want. So this article is from Middle East Eye. Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has ruled out talks with the U.S. while being threatened, according to Iranian state media. He said, quote, "It is unacceptable for us that they give orders and make threats. I won't even negotiate with you. Do whatever the hell you want," end quote. Iran said on Friday that it was not prepared to negotiate a new nuclear deal with the U.S. after President Donald Trump revealed that he sent a letter to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei asking for talks. And then Khamenei, the day after that, reiterated his view. And this is a shame because Pezeshkian, when he was running for president, he was campaigning on engaging with the West, trying to get sanctions relief. And Khamenei basically gave him the green light to do that. Trump comes in, claims that he wants to deal with Iran, goes back to his old maximum pressure campaign that didn't lead to any sort of deal in his first administration. And now we're seeing these comments from Iranian officials who were previously very open to the idea of talks with the U.S. I mean, specifically Pezeshkian here. So anyway, that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Jeffrey Sachs, negotiating a lasting peace in Ukraine. One from Ted Snyder, will the U.S. push Zelensky out? That's another thing. I didn't see anything about the U.S. telling Zelensky he's got to have elections or anything during the meeting. One from Ramsey Baroud, from Gaza to Syria, the unyielding reality of Israeli settler colonialism. One from Stavrula Pabst, U.S. security contractors walking thin line in Gaza. And one from Daniel Larison, attacking Iran won't solve anything. So please go check all of that out. Again, if you can, help us out with our fundraiser. If not, you can help us out in other ways by sharing this show, telling your friends about antiwar.com, liking and subscribing, and all that stuff all really helps out. Follow us on social media. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.